In this rural environment, we may have a robbery or a theft from time to time, but to have a robbery in which the cashiers were missing and believed to have been kidnapped, this is very unusual.
I remember telling my husband, she's gone, she's not here at this point. It's all sinking in, something, it's bad.
This is one of the worst crimes I've ever seen. It was like the entire town had been violated.
Outraged. I still am. I'm hurt. I want it fixed.
Nikki Ansley was born on June 24, 1983, in Houston, Texas, to her parents David Lynn and Melinda Jane. When Nikki was in the 9th grade, her family moved to Rusk, Texas. The small town was known for its peaceful way of life. Nestled about 2 hours north of Houston, it was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, and violent crime was almost unheard of, making it a perfect place for the Ansleys to raise their growing family. The transition to small-town life had been an adjustment, but Nikki thrived in it. As a teenager, she was outgoing and athletic, even becoming part of the local high school's basketball and softball teams. Her helpful nature also enabled her to make friends easily. That same year, she met Aaron Paul Dement, and their friendship soon blossomed into a romance. Throughout high school, the couple remained inseparable and were the picture of young love. However, when senior year came along in 2001, Nikki started receiving scholarship offers from different colleges to play on their softball teams. It was a difficult decision since the scholarship would take her away from Aaron and her family. Nonetheless, the young woman took the opportunity. However, things did not go as planned once she started college. That same year, she gave up the scholarship and went back to Rusk. The separation, no matter how brief, made Aaron realize that Nikki was the one for him, so he wasted no time and proposed to her a few days after their joyful reunion. The two also bought a home that Aaron spent time renovating in preparation for their new life. Touched by Aaron's devotion, Nikki was determined to do something special for him in return by buying his wedding ring. However, their wedding was just weeks away, set for October 12, 2002, and she did not have the money for the expensive gift. Despite her mother's offers to help, the headstrong young woman insisted on buying Aaron's wedding ring herself. With the help of a church friend named Candice Driver, she got a part-time job at BDJ's convenience store in July 2002. The store was in a remote area at a gas station, but the two young women felt safe working together. They were often alone in the store, with only a few passers-by for company. One regular was Kenneth Van Dever, a kind 37-year-old man with mental disabilities caused by a car accident. He was always willing to help with small tasks. The women didn't mind working late because Rusk had been free of violent crimes for a long time. However, on the night of September 2, 2002, that feeling of safety disappeared. September 2nd started like any other Monday. Nikki said goodbye to Aaron and went to work for her evening shift. Later, she and Candice chatted while restocking shelves and helping customers. Van Dever joined them later in the evening. As they got ready to close the store at 10 p.m., everything changed at 10:15 p.m. when two masked men burst in. One of them had a 12-gauge shotgun and ordered everyone to the front of the store, and Nikki, Candice, and Van Dever obeyed. With their hearts racing, they gathered near the cash register while the robbers insisted they empty it. After the women gave them the money, the robbers demanded the keys to the Cadillac parked outside. Candice, who had borrowed the car for work, got the keys from the back room and gave them to the robbers. What followed was unimaginable. Instead of escaping with the cash, the robbers forced all three victims into the Cadillac. As they drove south on Highway 69, Nikki recognized one of the masked voices. She cautiously asked if she knew him, and to her surprise, one of the men paused and removed his mask, confirming her suspicion. To her horror, she realized he was Bunka Adams, a former classmate from Rusk High School. His accomplice was Richard Cobb, who was only 18 at the time. Adams tried to calm the hostages by saying they wouldn't be harmed and that he just needed money for his children. However, the hostages found it hard to trust him as he turned off the main road and drove into a secluded area near Alto. When the car finally stopped, Adams ordered everyone out. He then forced Candice and Van Dever into the trunk and led Nikki away from the vehicle. Out of sight from the others, he violated her. Afterward, Adams returned with Nikki to the car and released Candice and Van Dever from the trunk. He told the terrified trio that he and his accomplice were waiting for some friends to arrive and that they could start walking away afterward. However, moments later, Adams changed his mind. He was worried that his captives might escape, find a house, and alert the authorities. So, he and Cobb decided to take no chances. With rising fear, Nikki, Candice, and Van Dever were forced to kneel. The two women's hands were bound behind their backs with their own shirts, while Van Dever was left unrestrained. For several agonizing minutes, Adams and Cobb stood behind their hostages, speaking in hushed tones as they debated what to do. Van Dever stood up at one point, oblivious to the danger he was in, and began repeating that it was time for his medicine and that he needed to go home. The man had become so agitated that the captors shot the firearm into the night sky to silence him. Adams then called out to ask if anyone had been hit. Candice managed to choke out a negative response. Seconds later, however, another shot rang out. This time, Van Dever cried out in pain. He had been hit. The third blast struck Nikki in her left shoulder, the impact knocking her forward and down to the ground. Candice fell too, pretending to have been shot. Adams approached Candice, still holding the smoking shotgun. He demanded to know if she was bleeding. When she didn't respond, he threatened to shoot her in the face if she didn't answer. Candice finally whispered that she wasn't, so Adams fired the gun next to her face. The two assailants then turned their attention to Nikki, kicking her repeatedly when she didn't respond to their questions. One of them lifted her by the ponytail, shining a lighter on her face to check for signs of life. Convinced she was dead, Cobb told Adams they could now leave. Meanwhile, back in Rusk, Nikki's mother, Melinda, was jolted awake around 11:30 p.m. by a feeling of dread. Realizing Nikki wasn't home yet, she tried calling her cell phone but got no answer. Increasingly worried, Melinda drove to the convenience store. What she found there only heightened her fears. The store was wide open despite being scheduled to close an hour earlier. Nikki's car was in the parking lot, but Candice's was nowhere to be seen. Inside, there was no sign of either young woman. Candice's husband, Tom, soon arrived, equally confused and concerned about his wife's whereabouts. When they noticed the missing cash register, they knew something was terribly wrong and immediately called the police. Texas Ranger Rudy Flores was brought in to assist the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. As he surveyed the scene, the signs of a robbery were clear, the cash register was missing, and the security camera had been ripped from the wall. However, the absence of the two cashiers was unusual in these cases, making the officer concerned. A BOLO alert was issued for Candice's missing Cadillac while search teams were mobilized to look for the women. Authorities also noted Kenneth Van Dever's bicycle parked outside the store, adding him to the list of missing persons. As the investigation kicked into high gear, a radio call came in that would change everything. A dispatcher reported that a badly injured woman had shown up at a house in the area, desperately in need of medical attention. When paramedics arrived, they found a young woman collapsed on a stranger's porch, bleeding heavily from a gaping wound in her back. It was Nikki Ansley. Nikki was rushed to the emergency room in critical condition. Doctors worked frantically to save her life, removing bullet fragments and treating a collapsed lung and multiple broken ribs. The shotgun blast had obliterated a large portion of Nikki's shoulder blade. For agonizing hours, her mother and fiancé could only wait and pray as surgeons worked tirelessly to repair the damage. After the surgery, Nikki was transferred to the ICU, and when she regained consciousness, her first concern was for Candice. Through a haze of pain medication, she recounted the terrifying events of the night to investigators. To everyone's immense relief, they soon learned that Candice had also survived. Candice, suffering only minor injuries, had managed to run to a nearby house after Adams and Cobb left them for dead, assuming Nikki and Kenneth were already gone. Meanwhile, Nikki, pretending to be dead, had summoned a surge of adrenaline and dragged herself to another house to seek help. Sadly, Kenneth Van Devere did not survive. His body was discovered with a fatal shotgun wound to the chest. As Nikki recovered in the hospital, the manhunt for her attackers intensified. Unlike Candice, Nikki had recognized the perpetrators, identifying them as former schoolmates from Rusk High School. She positively identified both Bunka Adams and Richard Cobb to the police. Investigators soon uncovered the dark pasts of both men. Cobb had a record for stealing a vehicle from a church, and Adams had a juvenile criminal record. They were also linked to a series of robberies in the months leading up to the tragic night. Just one day after the attack, on September 3, police received a tip about Adams and Cobb's location. Officers quickly apprehended them without incident. In police custody, Cobb initially exercised his right to remain silent, but Adams waived his rights and confessed to the robbery and kidnapping, though he denied violating Nikki or firing the shotgun. When Cobb learned of Adams' confession, he decided to speak as well, mostly corroborating Adams' story but claiming it was Adams who fired the fatal shots after Cobb handed him the gun. Both men were charged with capital murder. At Richard Cobb's trial, which began on January 30, 2004, he testified in his own defense, painting Adams as the mastermind behind the robbery and the escalating violence. Cobb claimed the original plan was simply to rob the store and flee, but Adams, fearing recognition by the victims, made the disastrous decision to take them hostage. Cobb claimed that Adams pressured him to shoot the victims to eliminate any witnesses. On the witness stand, Cobb testified that Adams had threatened to kill him if he refused to participate. Although Cobb admitted to firing the fatal shot that killed Van Devere, he insisted that Adams then took the gun and shot both women. Despite his attempts to shift the primary blame to Adams, Richard Cobb was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death for his role in Van Devere's killing. Bunka Adams went on trial on August 30, 2004. Nikki bravely took the stand, recounting the horrifying ordeal in detail. Her testimony played a crucial role in the prosecution's case. Prosecutors argued that, while surviving witnesses could not definitively identify which man shot Van Devere and Nikki, Adams was seen holding the shotgun immediately afterward. He also fired the shot next to Candice's head. Additionally, Adams was depicted as the clear leader, giving orders, while Cobb remained mostly silent, except to confirm that Nikki was dead. The jury found Adams guilty of capital murder. Under Texas law, capital murder convictions can be handed down to those who participate in a crime resulting in death, even if they did not personally inflict the fatal injury. Adams was also sentenced to death. He filed multiple appeals in the following years, but all were denied. Adams maintained from death row that his role was to act as a lookout for what he thought would be a simple robbery, and that things spiraled out of control when Cobb panicked after being recognized. He won a brief reprieve in April 2012 to review claims of inadequate legal representation, but the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals quickly overturned the stay, and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to intervene. On April 26, 2012, Bunka Adams was executed by lethal injection. Nikki and Van Devere's family members were present to witness his execution. In his final statement, Adams expressed remorse, apologizing to the victims and acknowledging his actions. He admitted that he had messed up irreparably and asked the victims' families not to harbor hatred toward him. Almost exactly 1 year later, on April 25, 2013, Richard Cobb was executed. Unlike Adams, Cobb exhibited no remorse in his final moments. Van Devere's family expressed the hope that Cobb would experience the same pain their son endured. For Nikki, witnessing the executions of both attackers brought a sense of closure. Though she had personally forgiven her attackers, she believed they needed to face justice for their crimes. In the months following the attack, Nikki's recovery was long and painful, both physically and emotionally. She lived in constant fear, unable to bear being alone, and slept with a gun beside her. But Nikki was determined not to let the trauma define her. On October 11, 2002, just weeks after the attack, Nikki married her fiancé, Aaron Paul Dement. Their wedding day was filled with emotion, as her loved ones reflected on how close they had come to losing her. Nikki showed great strength in the years that came after. She finished her education, became a nurse, and used her own experiences to help others. Although her marriage to Aaron ended in divorce, she later found love again and is now happy with her 2 children. On September 2, 2002, the small town of Rusk was deeply affected by events that disrupted its sense of safety. Van Dever's tragic death was felt by everyone who knew him, and many considered him a protector for Nikki and Candice that night. Nikki will always have the physical and emotional scars from that night, but she values life greatly and is committed to making the most of her second chance. Her transformation from victim to survivor shows the resilience and strength of the human spirit. Reflecting on her experience, Nikki shares, "People often see me as a victim, and I was one that night, but I also want to emphasize that I went in as a victim and came out as a survivor.